Before I start, who here heard of NgRx? Okay. Well, I assume you were at the Mike's talk yesterday, right? So I assume there would be more hands. Who's using NgRx, like actively using NgRx? Okay. Not a lot, not a lot. But we can help get you there. Okay. So my talk today would be about some of the tips that I have how NgRx can improve the user experience of your application. Before that, so I had a nice introduction already. I'm a software engineer at Google, working on the Firebase. I also recently became part of the NgRx core team. So I help maintain this library externally as well, and I maintain it within Google as well. So any Angular projects within Google, I sync the NgRx there and maintain it within it. And I'm also writer, and I help review articles for Angular in Depth. Who here heard of Angular in Depth? Oh, you guys are really missing out. It's one of the top source for any Angular news. The articles there go really, as it says, in depth. There are some high-level articles as well, but it's definitely one of the go-to resources for Angular. So definitely check that out. All right, and here's my Twitter if you want to follow. I mostly put things about the NgRx or Angular. I don't post my personal photos there, so feel free to join, follow me as well. All right, but before we get into the improvements of UX with NgRx, I'd like to tell you my story with NgRx. So in January 2017, I transferred from Google Firebase team to Firebase. It was a very exciting project for me. I was looking forward to it. The team was moving from Angular JS to Angular. You just heard Aaron's talk, how it could be complicated. We're still migrating. But that's when I moved to the team, and I was quite excited about that. And to help me tell my story, I'll show you a sentiment graph, how I feel people felt about the NgRx over time as it went along. So in January 2017, I feel like NgRx was already somewhat popular. I put it at around like 30% popular, and people liked it. And I had a very interesting task. My first task as Firebase was to deal with the notifications within the console. And I found the task very interesting. So for example, when the new notifications arrive, you see there a bell, there's a pulsing dot. So we poll periodically for the data. If there's new notifications, we have to merge them and show them. Also notifications are, we had like a side drawer, so you can click on it and you can actually see the full list of notifications. You can dismiss notifications there as well. It's like X there. So you can interact with that data in different ways. You can dismiss those notifications also from some of the pages as well. So again, this is the same data that we can interact differently. And again, remember the polling. And not all notifications were equal as well. So some notifications here are like urgent, and they pop up right away. They don't wait to be shown in a drawer. So again, this is filtering of the data and pushing it through different channels to the web app itself. So that was a complicated task, and I was looking for a solution that was solving that. And NgRx was a perfect fit. So this was my first time that I got familiar with NgRx. And for me, from there on, was NgRx all the way. NgRx got really popular and was getting more and more popular. And I think it got peak popularity at NGConf of 2018. That was last year, where the entire day of a conference was a track about the NgRx. So it was quite exciting times. But as I was using, and many more Googlers within the company were using NgRx, many more projects, some people were already feeling the pain, saying, hey, it might be a little bit complicated for the simpler use cases that I have, right? And this is where Mike also was telling people around, like, hey, sometimes, there are better fits for other applications. Large-scale enterprise application, definitely. But for smaller apps, maybe that's not the right case. And some people more join. More community members were talking about it as well, right? Again, NgRx is solving state management. If you don't have those problems, maybe this is not the right tool. So you can see the popularity was going a little bit more downwards. Because again, people sometimes were forced into it or were getting on board just because everybody was using it. And I think it's sort of, the downward trend sort of peaked earlier this year where there was an interesting talk that, like, yeah, don't use NgRx like ketchup, they say, right? Think about what you use, right? Understand before you adopt. That was all great advice, by the way. Don't just use any technology, NgRx or not, just because it's popular or because understand where it should be used. And I think Mike yesterday had a great talk about it, where you can use it and what problems it solves. So we were there actually some time ago. So what's next? What's next there? What's next for NgRx? How people think about it? I feel like, and I think we're already seeing this, we'll have a slightly more positive trend upwards now. Because people start to understand what problems it solves and where they actually need it or not. And I think it's going to go in a healthier way, not all the way up, but in a healthier way and be adopted in the projects that actually need it. Okay? And what makes me, hopeful about this? Well, there is a U.S. researcher and scientist, Roy Charles Amara, and he coined something that's called Amara's Law. And this addresses a particular problem within the technologies, that we tend to overestimate effects of a technology in the short run, but underestimate it in the long run. Gardner's hype cycle quite well depicts that Amara's Law. Is any technology sometimes spikes in the popularity, then goes a little bit with the disappointment, dips, and then normalizes in a healthy growth projection. Let me bring, for a second, that the graph that we had from the other slide. See the resemblance there? So, and this is, like, NgRx is not the only example of it. We had this with no SQL databases, right? Big hype, disappointment, and now we found a good use case for it. The same thing happens with microservices, right? Like, let's use all microservices, and then, hey, maybe some places it's not a good fit. And the biggest hype of all, many of you heard it, was the internet itself, right? That resulted in a 2000 crisis, .com bubble, which burst, it went all down, and now we're in healthy growth after that. So what I want you to take from this intro is learn new technology. It's fine to learn it, it's fine to experiment this, but understand its use cases. I think Mike really well yesterday showed some of the great use cases of NgRx. But always ask questions. Ask questions to yourself, ask questions to teammates, ask questions to community leaders. All right? And with that, let me take you to the actual use cases of NgRx where they can improve experience. And one more thing, actually, I want to say. NgRx is not like all or nothing thing. It's okay sometimes to mix a few architectural patterns. And it's okay in NgRx app, which is mostly NgRx app, use some pure service-based approaches for certain things where that makes sense. So don't try to squeeze NgRx in every single corner of your application if you don't feel it's a good fit. All right, so now back to the user experience. So imagine you're sitting at home in the office, and you obviously start typing, going to your most favorite serverless platform for your web applications or mobile applications, Firebase console. So you type in a URL, you see the spinner, and it's loading, it's loading, it's loading. Is anything happening? Is it something wrong with my network? Do I need to restart the page? Maybe reboot my computer? Well, in this case, it was pretty simple. I just disable all the network requests, and eventually it'll fail, and it'll give up. But what I want to show you here is as the wait time of a user waiting for your app to load increases, the user satisfaction, well, guess what? It goes down. And it goes down even more when the user is in the passive waiting, not just waiting, a passive waiting. And what's passive? Actually, passive waiting, it goes up to 36% more overestimation of the time. And what's passive waiting? Well, passive waiting is like sitting in front of your monitor, not being able to do anything, not being able to act on anything, is passive waiting. And users tend to overestimate that time by 36%. And what are we waiting for, actually? Well, we're waiting for initial loads of HTML, JavaScript, CSS. But after that, what mostly we're waiting for is AJAX, right? Asynchronous server calls. And at this time, we're pretty familiar with them, right? So this is what we use to get data asynchronously, be it like read, delete, update, any of that. So, and that's so that our page does not get reloaded on every time. And that was like a great gift for us, which is popular for now, what, 10 years, 15 years or so. But it also gave us, rewarded our users with the beautiful spinners. Anybody enjoy watching spinners? Okay, we got one. Okay, two people enjoy watching spinners. Well, I'm not in that camp. I would with most of you. So what can we do with that? And what's the cause of it? Well, we can actually either reduce the number of, or the length that we see the spinner, or the number of times with three techniques that we can do in NgRx. One is proper error handling. Second one will be NgRx store as a cache. And the final one would be optimistic UI approach. So let's start with the error handling. And again, you can do those techniques in non-NgRx way as well. But with NgRx, it's quite easy to do, and I'm going to show you how. So error handling. Let's look into this. How do we interact with this server, and how do we sort of get that spinner out? Well, when user clicks the button, the first thing that we do sometimes is just, show the spinner. After that, we do the actual server request. But the trick here is that sometimes those requests fail. And we as a developer sometimes miss that case, right? We were like, oh, we get the data, spinner, visible equals false, and we're like happy with that. But we tend to forget sometimes about the error handling scenarios, and we don't turn it off. So it's quite an easy fix on the server-based approach as well, not only in NgRx. But this is what we see in the console, and what user sees is the infinite spinner, right? Which could be really, really confusing to the user. So I'll show you how to handle that within NgRx. But before we do that, I'll do the quick overview what NgRx is. Well, it starts with the store. And store is an immutable object where you put all your shared application state, right? Shared application state. not local state, shared application state. And to change anything, it's immutable. To change anything in it, we have a functions called reducers, special functions. Each one of them is responsible for its own slice of store, and it takes actions. It looks when it needs to change, and it changes that piece of store. So where do actions come from? Well, components, instead of calling the services directly, they dispatch those actions when something happens. To get the data back from the store, components are using selectors, right? So selectors look into different parts of the store, transform the data, combine the data together, and provide it to the component. They create something called view models as well. So this is how it sort of have a loop. But here, all asynchronous stuff, all the server calls is done in effects. Effects do the asynchronous server calls where they get back, and then they dispatch new actions based if it's successful or it's an error. And it goes back into the action stream. So this is a full picture of NgRx. So Mike yesterday talked about effects as well. But what effects are, in a nutshell, it's RxJS listener of new actions, and they result, for example, this observable stream, and they result, for example, here, success is a smile, and error is a not so smile face. Those dots represent could be different operators that we use, for example, map, or that transform some of the data filters. So if everything goes well, we get a success callbacks, and we continue to listen to new input values. And when all goes well, we're all happy, right? However, what happens if there's an error? Well, if the error happens in the observable stream, it goes into the error channel. And good, we have a callback for error. But what some people don't realize is that we actually stop listening for any new actions or any new input observable values. So how do we handle that? Well, there's a special catch error operator where we can handle the error, it listens for the error channel. And here you go, we handled it, and it continues good. We have a happy face. And it stops. So this is another thing that is quite tricky with RxJS, is that catch error still stops listening for the new input observable values. So how do we handle that? Well, the trick here is to push it into another observable. So for example, here, concat map is a flattening operator. The second circle would represent our service call. And we handle the error before we flatten it into the main stream. So for example, there, happy result. Then we have the error, it's handled before it's flattened into the mainstream. But look, we continue to listen for the new ones. So this structure is so popular and so frequently used that we typically have like 3 actions. Is a trigger action, success action, and the error action. And they fit nicely in there. So this is how we handle errors in RxJS, NgRx. And again, some people call it boilerplate, but it's a lot better than infinite spinners, in my opinion. And what's actually interesting is that with the new version of NgRx, version 8, we now don't just fail your stream, we also allow you to automatically resubscribe to the new actions. Okay, so this is error handling. Next would be cache. So web app performance matters, right? And it matters even more in large scale applications. So for that, for our web applications, Chrome team has something, they created something that's called Rail. Anybody heard of Rail? Good, yes. So Rail is a user-centric performance model that sort of focuses on the key aspects of the user journey. It stands for response, animation, idle, and loading. And they provide guidance for every single one of them. If it's the first time you hear about, I definitely recommend going to the Chrome team site and read about it or Google it. You'll see it. It's really cool. But we'll focus on the loading part of it. And what the Rail model recommends is that any web page should be able to load on a mid-range mobile device on a 3G connection in under 5 seconds. So this is for the best user experience. And any subsequent loads should be in under 2 seconds. And with some of the NgRx techniques, we can actually achieve that. And for that, we'll use, as an example, a simple app. It will be like a store application. So our store application will have like 2 pages for now. This is the page 1 where we see the list of products, right? So when we open up the page, we query the entire get API call for get the list of the products. When we click on one of the products, we get to the second page. We'll call it a product details page. And here you can see some of the data that you saw in the previous one about the product, plus it has additional information, for example, such as description or maybe user ratings. Okay, so this is the structure. So when we open the page for the first time, right, we load the list of products. We send a request, we get the list of products back. That means we already have at least some minimal information about each product already. So we have that cached data. Now when we click on the product itself, we can use that information and display it on the new page already, while the new request for the product, specific product API goes through and gets additional data such as description, for example. This way, user doesn't have to stare at the blank screen with a spinner. So here's, for example, how it compares when you use that cache data or not. And store could be that cache for you. See the one on the left? You have a spinner, and it feels a lot less responsive, right? The one on the right, you already have some information. And you can put like indeterminate progress bar there as well if you want to. So how do we achieve that with NgRx? Let's see. Oh, actually, before we go there, there's a second one. So now we are at the details page, right? But we already were on the first page before that. So we still have a cached list of products. Now we click back onto the title and go back to the home page. So my application, the list of products doesn't change a lot. So I can pull off this trick. And I can, in the meantime, show the cached version of that. So I show all products before that. So the user can see and interact with them. But at the same time, you see on top there, indeterminate progress bar, that means they are doing another API call to get a new list of products. And it indicates to the user that, hey, the data that you see, you can use it, but it might change. So this is another use the store as a cache for that purpose. And again, let's compare it side by side. So for example, the one on the left, we don't use any cache. We're just saying loading or put the spinner there. On the one on the right, we use that cache data. And again, it's not for all applications. If your application is highly dynamic and that list of products will change for sure, or don't use that, right? There's some other better techniques for that, like ghost elements or something like that. Yeah, so it's not definitely for all. So that the data could be stale, right? So definitely be cautious about that. So let's see how our details page was implemented. And what did we have to do to get that partial info and then the full info? Well, it's funny enough that our detail component just doesn't have to do any much, actually. It just listens for the data that it selects from the store for the current product. It's using selector. So it doesn't have to do anything to get the updated information or to show the cached information first. What it would do is just, just say, hey, I need to fetch my current product data. So here, the trick is actually in the effect here. So here we have, here you go. Here it is. So we'll listen for this. This is the action that our product detail component just dispatched. We'll get the current product ID that was populated probably like with a router store. So it knows from the URL which current product we're trying to get information. Then we would call the service to get that particular product information, and we would dispatch another success action with that information. And of course, we also handle error. All right. So in the reducer, this is again new style reducers that I'm showing you. In the reducer, this is the fetch product multiple. This is the one that gets dispatched when we get the list of all of the products. And here we're using NgRx entity as well to update that. So you see the product adapter add all. This is when we push the information on the initial page load with partial information about each of the products. However, when we get the detailed one, we still use it, same type products, and we update just that specific product, right? So selector just works seamlessly. It gets the new, it pushes the new data into the store. Selector pushes it to the component, and component seamlessly just starts displaying that data. Okay? So that was navigating within the app, right? We already opened the page and we go from app to app. What if the user returns to your app for the first time? Or for the second time? For that, we can use local storage. Local storage is a browser API that stores some of the user data locally on the browser. So for example, here it compares when we return. And again, we see either the loading or some of the cache data that we stored in local storage. And again, it's even more caution here. Sensitive data, first of all, don't put any sensitive data in local storage. But secondly, the data could be very, very stale, right? We don't know when the user returns back to your application. And how do we achieve that? How do we sort of push that data to the local storage? Well, for that, we would use the meta reducers. They are almost like regular reducers, but they can operate in a high level and intercept the data just before the reducer or just after it. And we have a special action that NgRx emits it by itself. It's a init action. This is when the entire app initializes. And on that, we'll just read data from the store. We'll check the local storage. Do we have any data for us to display? If not, then nothing. If yes, we can push that data and use it as a cache. On any other actions, we'll just update the local storage with the current data. Okay, so all of those still involve the spinner or indeterminate progress bar, but can we get rid of the spinner altogether? Well, if the only reason why we show the spinner or do something like that is to confirm that the backend received our information, then we can avoid it altogether with optimistic UI technique. Who heard of optimistic UI? Okay. I'm sure you've all used it. It's like looking at the world through the rose-colored glasses. So where we use it, if you use Twitter, Facebook, or anything, any social media platforms, they almost all use it. When we like the post, so here, for example, I first disable the network communication, so the app cannot talk to the backend. But if you can see, whenever I click the like button, it reacts right away. And then it realizes that there's an error, and it rolls back to the previous state. So it sort of enables this feature optimistically, right? It turns it like, yeah, you're good, you like it. And then in the end, I enable the network request, and it goes through and returns the number 15, for example. So where can we use this? For example, here I'm adding item to the cart, right? We can wait for the server to respond that, oh, I actually confirm now you have that item in the cart and update it there, or we can increase that counter optimistically. And if the error happens, let me just go again. And if the error happens, see, like, goes right away, 1, 2, 3. If the error happens, for example, 4, and the error happened, we show the toast, for example, that error happened, and we roll back to the previous state. So we see 3 now instead. So here's also cautions here. So first of all, optimistic UI should be used on the APIs that have very low probability of failure. That's first. Secondly, it has to be not a critical API. And third one is the response from the API has to be within 2 seconds, because this is the amount of the user attention span. If it goes longer than that, it'll be quite a jarring experience for the user. And when I say they're not critical, like adding item to the cart is not critical, but for example, completing the purchase flow button, right? It's quite critical. If you want to roll it back, please don't do the optimistic. So how do we achieve that? Well, it's quite interesting because we achieve that magic within the effect itself and the combination with a reducer. So this is our typical way of writing the effect. We would have, listen for the specific type of add item, and then we call the service and to add the cart item, and on success we would push that item ID into. This is the typical way, and on error we do nothing. Optimistically, on success we do nothing, but on error we push that item. Why? Well, first of all, for the add item, we add item to the NgRx store immediately on the trigger action itself, not on the success, but on the trigger one. And for the error, why we pass it? Because we need to know which one to roll back if the error happens. So again, we here on add item, this is when we push the item to the store, not on success. On success, we actually do nothing, right? Because it's like success, okay, we already applied it into our application state. And again, on error, we needed to pass it there. And then the reducer side, again, this is on the add item. This is when we add item to the array. And on the error, we revert back to the previous state. So optimistic UI, it has a lot of interesting, tricky psychology behind this. Denis Mishunov has a great article about this, True Lies of Optimistic User Interfaces. I highly recommend reading this article. And all the stuff that I talked today about, I also have in my article at Angular in Depth. Remember the resource that I mentioned at the beginning? So please go and read it as well. So we covered today those 3 major techniques: error handling, store as a cache, and optimistic UIs, which are just your additional tools in your toolboxes. So whenever next time you see the spinner in the app that you develop, please think about the user, put yourself in the user's shoes, and see if you can improve it or not. Thank you.